Often quilts are all about the perfect fabric choice. That's right, this basic basket weave with these ombre fabrics, I don't think could be more attractive. I'm gonna show you how to do this super simple quilt. Let's get started. Vanessa & Co. added some confetti dots to their already fantastic palette of ombre fabrics for Moda recently, and so that's what we're using today. I have an entire one of these 2.5-inch jelly roll strips, which features 2 strips of each of the 20 colors. I love it, love it, love it. But I also am going to use the little honey bun, the 1.5-inch strip, and I used 1.5 of these packets because I'm simply going to lay in strip set fashion a skinny strip between every wide strip. That's all we need to do, right? So I've got skinny, wide, skinny, wide, skinny. And it's gonna be super simple, but there's a couple of fun design engineering choices. Why don't you join me at the design wall and I'll show you where we're really heading today, right? So as you can see here at the design wall, I have gotten a head start on making our samples for today's project, but I just want to remind you what you're looking at here. There are 2 of each and every strip up on the wall already, and what I really did is I've unpacked them in the order in which they were sent to me. So starting from the black all the way down to the yellow strips that I have built. Maybe you can see them down here. We're going to come back to that in a second. What we're going to do to make our first strip set rows is I want to go ahead and I want to take and make with both the exact same fabric. So these are the same piece of fabric. I'm going to make a strip set row here, again skinny, wide, and so forth. And then I'm going to match this in its row to its companion fabric. So we're going to work on both of these colors right now. I'm going to grab these and head over to the sewing machine to get started. Now, one of the things I often do is I like to organize myself, and I'm going to sew all of our strips all in one direction. So what I really want you to be listening for right now are some of the hopefully new tips and techniques I can be giving you, which will give you the ability to sew your strips all in one direction and end up with a fantastic piece when you're all done. My first thing I actually do when I start is I'm always looking at the second piece of fabric. So I'm grabbing the 2 of them as I'm going to sew them in order, but as I come to my machine, I'm always looking at my add-on piece. So right now, yes, my larger piece is on top of my smaller piece, but that's okay because later on they're going to add up. I'm going to back stitch here, and I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to sew these at a nice medium pace. And then I stop and I reorganize. I'm constantly making sure my fabrics are down here in a nice fashion. I often like to keep the weight up here on the table, and I've also set my seam allowance to a shorter stitch length. So a lot of times we have digital machines that have a number like a 2.5. I would be doing a 2.0. What I'm looking at is my edge guide, and I have the peaks or the little pinked edges, the tops of those are hitting right up against the edge guide, which is giving me a nice consistent seam allowance. And every time I need to readjust my hands, I'm stopping the machine to adjust. Stopping to adjust. And the reason I like to do this is if I start with all my fabrics on one side, and if I sew proper, I'm not going to get a veer or a curve. I've heard people recently call it a smile in my fabric. And what it does allow me to do is it maximizes the amount of fabric I'm using. So I should have pointed out, I've actually even left my selvages on as I'm sewing. Now, as I come to my ironing station, that's the next key we're going to need to do is as I prepare to press, the piece that I was just looking at is still in the up position, and I'm going to take and make sure my iron's nice and hot. And I've got kind of a steam function going in here too. And now what I'm doing is I'm setting the iron, and you can kind of see how it's kind of bulging right over that thread. So that's actually setting that seam. And then I'm just going to flatten it over and hit again. Like this. And then I've got a little bit of a shorter ironing surface for myself so that I've got a nice cutting space. So I'm just going to go ahead and move this down and do it again. And so far, so good. I've got both pieces looking sharp. Now we're going to go ahead and This piece was sitting right here in my assembly. So now, as I line those selvages up at the top again, as I was stating, I am now looking at the add-on piece. I'm looking at the new piece. And the reason that's so important is I believe that as we build our quilt squares, the weight of that square, or the weight of the strip sets or whatever we're doing, it needs to ride on your feed dogs, your feed teeth. So the heavier piece, just like when you're going through the airport and your luggage, the heavier piece should be below, and your lighter piece of fabric should be on the top. And I know I broke my rules in the first seam, but those are just two pieces coming together. Let's go ahead and stop and reorganize a little bit, making sure. Another fun thing I like to do is in this hand is I'll have both of my fingers kind of splitting over the fabrics, and that allows them to be traveling together without a stretch in this back area here. Okay, so I'm going to speed up the camera work for you, but not speed up my pace. We're going to jump into caffeinated mode, but that doesn't mean I'm going any faster. It just means it'll look faster, and I'll be back with all of this put together for you. Show you how nice it turned out. Okay, so let's slow it down a little bit here. And I just, again, really wanted you to have the confidence to know that you can sew all of your strips in one direction. If you just take a little bit of time and a little bit of fabric management, you're gonna get a really nice, crisp strip set row. Now I want to explain the rest of the construction, so let's go to the quilt first so you can really see what we're doing here. We're going to be making squares, and with the squares in this quilt here, I just want you to see as we're going across, I'm actually using both color families in like this yellow or in the peach or in the pink colorways. So I'm going to have to make a whole nother strip set to fill in here. And I'm also really trying to focus on the dark fabrics, generating the dark from the center out and having the lighter on the edges and the dark in the middle, which is kind of unlike what I normally do. So in order to do that, we're going to need to cut squares. And in cutting the squares, as I looked at my fabric here, because I wanted the dark focus, I wanted the ability to use the wonderful confetti dots, which are more on the edges, I'm going to cut each strip starting at the selvage. Now, what you need to do is you need to measure your strips from bottom to top, and whatever this distance is the size you're going to make your squares. Now, mine are all measured at 7 3/4, and yours should be pretty darn close as well. And the next thing I've done, I'm not even sure if you can see it here, but with a dry erase marker, I've already marked just on the other side of my 7 3/4 line, so that while I'm using that line later on, I continually make the same cuts, because I do not have extra fabric the way I made my strips. So if I make a mistake in my cutting size, it's going to be an issue. So I'm going to slow down and focus. I'm going to trim off this first edge right there. Now that that's been trimmed, I'm going to rotate it over. And then now I've got my line that is just past the 7 3/4, because I'm cutting 7 3/4. And I'm also looking at the lines here in my strip sets to make a really nice and square cut. So I'm going to cut one here, and because of that dark coloring format is important, I'm going to keep them in the same order. I'm going to slide that down. I'm using that same line for my success there, making sure everything's lined up. And I'm going to cut again. And just to reiterate, what we need to be able to do later on is rotate those and have them be the same size. So this is a dark edge over there, dark edge over here. I'm going to now slide my strip set down. I want to trim this edge. And again, I'm just taking those selvages off. So trimming that edge there. And then I'm going to go ahead and spin this, and I'm going to cut 2 more squares, and I'm going to talk about what happens in the center. And this is why I love having that line, because you're going to make 20 strip sets, right? So you're going to have a lot of pieces. Still laying my dark on that far side. Okay. Now, the last little design element I want to talk about for you is something that you can do, but I didn't do it in my quilt, so this is where your creativity can go wild. Look what you have here. You have one more square that's a possibility, but to make it symmetrical, I'm going to want to somehow find that square out of the center. So you could trim off either side and create a fifth square out of each strip set. But for the quilt I have behind me, and I'm just going to cheat and check my notes. Yes, I'm correct. It is 58 by 74 inches. I've used 4 squares from each strip set, so I have this left over for later for other projects, or if you wanted to use borders or something like that. But I just wanted 2 nice dark squares from each one stacked up here. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to run over to my design wall. And while I'm here, I'm going to grab that other strip set I made, which was actually the lighter of the 2 families. And remember, the lightness and the darkness is really important in my work in this particular project. So I'm going to come on back over here. And I'm going to go ahead and ask you to grab yourself a quick cup of coffee while I take my time and cut down these squares proper. And I'll be back with everything to show you how to arrange them. Oh boy, that coffee is smelling good. I certainly hope you brought me a cup. It's all right, I don't need it. It won't take us long to get through the rest of the steps for construction. Actually, what I really want you to do is make all of your strip set rows first, then cut them all into squares and keep them stacked up. And remember, we're using 2 different pieces of fabric as a family. So I'm even keeping in my stacks my lights on top of my darks. But as I get ready to build a row, I'm going to use 4 blocks from the lighter version and the darker version of those families. And I'm going to show you, I've actually already built this yellow row that you see across the top in the quilt so that you can understand the way we're going to manipulate. So please do all of your layout first before you do any of your construction. So your design wall will just have these blocks all separate still. Now, what I was talking about earlier is I want the darkest fabrics in the middle of my rows. And therefore, I'm going to try to kind of keep all my lightest pieces of each family on the edges. So this one here was my lightest of the families and the lightest of that group. So now I'm going to bring it over here and I'm going to rotate it into position so that my stripes are heading in opposite directions, right? And so here's my darker edge of the fabric pushing towards the light that way. And then I just kind of work in a family. So this one is pointing up, this one is pointing up. So I'm going to take this one here and I'm going to rotate it so it's also going sideways. And here, this is the dark because it's pointing towards the middle. And then on the opposite side, I'm going to do the same, but now the dark is pointing back. So this is kind of the middle here in the project. And then I move this one out to the edge, but not to the far corner. I don't know if I should maybe move this, if this will help us a little bit to see here, like that. So now as I get ready to drop in the next pieces of these families, I come in here and I look and I can say, oh my goodness, this is much lighter than this one. So I'm going to bring it over here. And now it is running in opposite directions here and opposite directions here. And that's how we get our basket weave happening. Drop this in, dark at the bottom. And then I'm going to take this one here. Whoops, that one goes out at the further edge because it was the lighter of the 2. And then this one goes in here. So the dark's in the bottom row. And again, just build your entire design on your design wall that way. And then it's very simple assembly where I'll just go ahead and take each. I'm gonna go ahead and do a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now be careful, you're gonna have, your seams heading in one direction on one side, and then you have your nice flat pieces, but just keep sewing block by block by block until you've created a row. Once your rows are all built, you're going to sew your rows together to form up the quilt. And once the quilt is all done as a quilt top, at that point, it's a fantastic place for you to practice some of your free motion machine quilting. Or if you're like me and you were playing on the super fast and easy side of the quilt project today, I actually shipped mine out to the Missouri Star Quilt Company and I had them use their long arm quilting service. And they did this really fun champagne bubbles all over it. And again, I love the circular motifs on the straight line quilts just to add a little more character and texture in the thing we love called textiles. Now, I hope you love the simplicity and the fun in this basic basket weave. You know me, I'm always trying to just stay one step ahead of you in the creative side right here at Man Sewing. Thanks for being a Man Sewing fan. It's great to have you out there encouraging me to create fantastic new content. If you've missed any of the videos, we've got links for you here and here. And while you're checking those out, make sure you're subscribed. We don't want you to miss any of the action.